The digital clock blinked 8:52 a.m. in cold red numbers against the glass wall of the 43rd floor. The boardroom, wide, angular, and immaculate, gleamed under the sterile glow of recessed lighting. Polished marble floors reflected the city's skyline, and the long obsidian table was set like a battlefield. Black folders aligned perfectly, bone-white porcelain cups filled with Colombian roast, and a tray of exotic fruits, so precisely arranged they looked sculpted. Everything was ready, except the one thing that mattered most. A sharp clatter cut through the murmurs. An iPhone slammed onto the table, its screen now cracked like a spiderweb. "Where the hell is the translator?" barked a voice that made the nearest intern flinch. The man in the navy suit stood tall, fists clenched, jaw tight. His watch, Rolex, custom, glinted with every impatient twitch of his wrist. His name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Everyone in that room knew who he was. And more importantly, what he was capable of when things didn't go according to plan. No one dared to speak. His executive team stood frozen by the glass doors, their polished shoes rooted to the floor like chess pieces waiting to be sacrificed. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick, sharp, alive. 8:55. 5 minutes until the Japanese delegation arrived. 5 minutes to lock in the biggest international contract of the decade, perhaps the century, for the company. Billions were on the table. Reputations at stake. The man turned sharply toward a nervous assistant. "Did you call the agency?" "Why, yes, sir. I've been on the phone with them for half an hour. The interpreter's stuck in traffic. There's been an accident on the expressway. They say he won't make it in time. And you didn't think TO have a backup?" He roared, veins bulging at his temples. The assistant shrank into himself, lips trembling, eyes darting to the floor. A deadly silence followed. Then, heels clicked down the corridor. Slow, soft, unwelcome. A janitor's cart rolled gently past the glass wall. Pushing it was a woman in a plain gray uniform, her dark hair tied into a tight bun. She paused, just for a moment, not inside the room, just close enough to listen. She stood still, expression unreadable, her eyes scanning the room with quiet focus, unnoticed by most, unimportant to all, until now. Back inside, panic grew. Does anyone here speak Japanese? Korean? Mandarin? Anything useful? The man shouted, almost desperate now. A timid voice emerged from the far end of the room. I studied French in high school." A withering glare silenced the poor soul. "Useless. Every one of you." He spat. The room shrank around his fury. The walls seemed to close in. But just as his voice rose again, another voice cut through the tension like a scalpel. "Excuse me, sir. I can help." Heads turned. The janitor stood now in the doorway. Her voice was calm, clear. Her posture, straight. Her eyes, steady. He blinked, confused, then amused. "You," he scoffed. She nodded once. "You speak Japanese?" Someone chuckled from the side, drawing a few awkward laughs. She didn't flinch. She took a single step forward and said evenly, "Japanese, English, French, German, Italian. Which would you prefer?" Laughter stopped cold. The temperature in the room shifted, just slightly, but unmistakably. The man in the suit narrowed his eyes, studying her like she was a riddle he'd never noticed on the wall. His pride flared. His instincts screamed no. But the clock. 8:59. 30 seconds. "This is insane," muttered a board member. Then ding. The elevator chimed. The glass doors slid open, and in walked 5 sharply dressed men, speaking rapidly in Japanese, briefcases in hand. They bowed politely, smiles on their faces. They waited expectantly. The CEO froze. His empire teetered. His team looked at him, then at the janitor. She didn't speak. She simply walked forward, past the table, past the stairs, and stopped just behind the head chair. Her voice, when it came, was elegant, confident. "Good morning. Welcome. I'll be your interpreter today." The Japanese men smiled. The room fell into stunned silence. And in that moment, one man's illusion of control shattered completely. The silence was suffocating. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. All eyes were now fixed on her. The woman in the gray uniform, the one who mopped floors at dawn and vanished by dusk, who everyone saw but no one noticed. And now she stood there, calmly, as if this room, this moment, this pressure belonged to her. The CEO blinked in disbelief, his jaw tense. His instinct was to lash out, to throw her out of the room, to remind everyone who was in charge. But he didn't, because the clock said 8:59, and the Japanese investors were already stepping into the room. 5 men in tailored suits bowed slightly and exchanged brief greetings in their language. They smiled, polite, patient, but not for long. They expected professionalism, excellence, and above all, preparedness. He was not prepared. She was. Without waiting for permission, the woman stepped forward, gave a slight bow, and addressed the delegation with a warm, confident tone. "Good morning. Welcome. It will be an honor to interpret for you today," she said, in their native language, perfectly. One of the Japanese executives smiled and nodded in approval. The CEO, still frozen, turned toward her. "What did you just say to them?" he asked through clenched teeth. She met his gaze without fear. Her eyes didn't flicker. "I welcomed them to the company and introduced myself as today's interpreter," she replied calmly. In Japanese, the room stirred with murmurs. The tension shifted from panic to confusion, then to awe. No one knew what to make of this. How could a janitor, speak like that? The woman didn't waver. She moved toward the head of the table and stood next to the CEO, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. She was composed, elegant, and frighteningly capable. The investors began discussing terms. She translated without hesitation, each technical detail, each number, each legal nuance, flawlessly. 15 minutes passed, and with each passing second, the CEO's internal fury simmered. He didn't understand what was happening. Worse, he couldn't control it. She was speaking for him. She was the one commanding respect. She was the one being watched, admired, and listened to. And it wasn't supposed to be her. He turned toward his assistant and gave him a look sharp enough to cut glass. The assistant shrank in his seat. But before the CEO could say a word, one of the Japanese men made an offhand comment in French. Without missing a beat, the woman responded, also in French, and then turned to the CEO. "He's asking if the financial terms are negotiable," she translated smoothly. He also said he'd prefer to continue the discussion in French, if you're comfortable with that. The CEO blinked again. His mouth was dry. He managed a stiff nod. He was being outshined, outranked, in his own kingdom. And yet, there was something else now. A spark of recognition. That name. That voice. But he couldn't place it. Not yet. The meeting continued seamlessly. The woman, once invisible, was now the axis around which the entire negotiation turned. Every question passed through her. Every answer was delivered with poise and precision. She wasn't just a translator. She was the conductor of an orchestra no one else had realized existed. But the CEO, he wasn't listening anymore. He watched. He studied. And something about her was unsettling. Familiar. There was a sharpness in her movements. A quiet power. It was as if this moment, this exact moment, had been rehearsed. Suddenly, one of the Japanese investors leaned forward and spoke. "What is your name, miss?" The question echoed in the air. She turned to him and smiled. A small, graceful smile, but with something buried underneath. "Oh wait, a secret." "Marina," she said. "Marina Sanchez." The name struck the CEO like a blade. His breath caught. He didn't know why, but it rattled something. Deep, distant. "How long have you worked here, Miss Marina?" the investor asked, clearly intrigued. She tilted her head slightly, stealing a glance at the CEO before answering. "A little over 6 months." "Incredible," the man replied. "How does someone with your education end up working as cleaning staff?" That question should have humiliated her, but it didn't. She paused, just for a second, and then replied, "Sometimes there are more important reasons to be in a place than what's written on a resume." Everyone nodded, impressed. But only the CEO heard the double meaning in those words. More important reasons? He swallowed hard. Something was off. Very off. Who was she? What was she doing here? Why had she never appeared in any internal reports? Why was this the first time he was hearing her name? But more importantly, why did she look at him like she already knew everything? And then it hit him. This wasn't luck. This wasn't improvisation. This woman hadn't just stepped up to save the day. She'd been waiting for it. This meeting, this stage, this moment, was hers, not his. The meeting began to wind down. The Japanese executives exchanged satisfied looks, offering final handshakes, and nodding at Marina with deep respect. One of them even said, through her interpretation, that this had been one of the smoothest and most well-managed business meetings they had attended abroad. The CEO forced a smile, his hands clammy. His mind wasn't in the room anymore. It was spinning, trying to catch up with something that had long ago slipped through his fingers. As soon as the investors left the conference room, the air changed again. Marina remained still, standing straight, calm, composed, while everyone else was falling apart internally. The moment the glass doors shut behind the delegation, whispers exploded like gas leaks. Who is she? Where did she learn all those languages? Was she hired secretly? Is she even part of the cleaning staff? She's been here for months. How do we not know? The CEO turned toward her slowly, his face tight, almost pale. He didn't say thank you. He didn't applaud. He just stared at her like he was trying to peel off a mask with his eyes. "You," he finally muttered, voice low and sharp like a blade. "My office." "Now." She nodded once and walked ahead of him. He hated how confidently she moved, how effortlessly she walked through the halls that had once echoed with his authority alone. Employees parted for her. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with admiration, a few with fear. The moment they entered his office, he closed the door behind them, hard. The silence between them stretched. He circled her like a wolf studying prey, but she didn't look afraid. She looked ready. "I want answers," he growled. "Now." Marina met his eyes. "About what exactly?" "Don't play with me," he snapped. "Who are you really? Where did you come from? And what the hell are you doing here?" She held his stare for several seconds before walking toward the window. She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the city below, as if weighing whether to speak or let him drown in the mystery a little longer. Finally, her voice came, low and deliberate. "I came here for one reason, and I just completed the first part of it." He frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" She turned toward him again, her tone colder now. No longer just calm, but distant. "6 months ago," she said, "I applied for a position in your company. I didn't use my degrees. I didn't mention my background. I wanted to see how you treated people when you believed they had nothing to offer you." He stared at her. "Try and process it." "Why?" he asked, voice trembling between confusion and anger. "Because I already knew who you were," she replied, her words slicing through the room like glass. "And I needed to be sure you hadn't changed." Something flickered in his expression. A crack. A memory perhaps. But it vanished too fast to be sure. "You're insane," he said under his breath. "You planned this. Down to the minute." Her voice was still even, still controlled, but something was beginning to shine beneath it. Pain. Fire. A story. A reason. He took a step forward, suddenly more cautious. He saw it now. This wasn't just some overqualified woman trying to prove a point. This was personal. "What do you want from me?" he asked, not yelling this time, just asking. She smiled faintly. "Justice," she said. And then, without another word, she walked out of the room, leaving him standing in his glass tower, heart racing, eyes wide, and for the first time in years, afraid. He didn't move for a long time after she left. The office was silent, save for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. He stared at the closed door as if it might open again, as if this had all been some strange dream, an illusion crafted by his exhausted mind. But no, she had been real. Her voice, her presence, her words. Justice. That word kept echoing inside him like a siren in an empty tunnel. Why would a janitor, a multilingual, impossibly sharp janitor, come looking for justice? He walked to his desk, loosened his tie, and dropped heavily into his chair. His hand instinctively reached for the drawer, pulling out a bottle of scotch. He poured 2 fingers into the glass with a shaky hand. And then it hit him. Marina Sanchez. The name had sounded familiar from the beginning, but now it clawed at something deeper. He swiveled to his computer, opened the employee directory, and typed her name. Nothing. Her employee file was restricted by him. What the hell? He dug deeper, searching older databases, archived HR records. Then suddenly, there it was. Not just 6 months ago, 10 years ago. Marina Sanchez, intern, Department of International Affairs, Oxford graduate, languages spoken, 6, recommendations, glowing, and then terminated. He frowned. He didn't remember firing her. He didn't remember her at all. Not truly. But the further he looked into her file, the more he began to remember. She had once been brilliant, promising. Everyone said so, until the day her name had been pulled into a scandal. Not one of her own making, but one that had left her destroyed all the same. He clicked open the attached report, scanned the words. Breach of confidentiality. Unauthorized access. Dismissed without appeal. Except, none of it made sense. He had barely read her case back then. It had been pushed across his desk like so many others. There had been too many rumors, too many names. He had signed the order without even meeting her. And now she was back. His hands trembled. Not from guilt. Not yet. But from the growing realization that whatever she had come for wasn't finished. Downstairs, Marina stood in the elevator, watching the numbers descend. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked calm. But inside, her chest burned. 10 years. 10 years since they had erased her. Since they used her as a scapegoat. Since she watched her dreams collapse with one stroke of a pen, his pen. And now, she was inside his fortress. She had studied the layout, the systems, the players. She knew exactly who had laughed when she fell, who had stayed silent, and who had helped bury the truth. But she also knew something else. They all thought she had disappeared. They never expected her to return. And none of them, not even him, recognized what she was truly capable of. Yet, the news of the mysterious janitor-turned-polyglot interpreter spread through the building like wildfire. Every floor buzzed with whispers. Did you see what happened upstairs this morning? She spoke 5 languages. I swear 5. She led the meeting. The CEO didn't say a word unless she translated it. Who is she really? By lunchtime, Marina's name was on everyone's lips, but no one dared to approach her directly. She had already returned to her cart, pushing it slowly down the hallway of the 17th floor, gloves on, mop in hand. To most, it looked like she had gone back to normal. But those who caught her eyes knew better. She wasn't blending in anymore. She was watching, measuring, waiting. Meanwhile, in his office, the CEO paced. His pride screamed to bury the incident, but his instincts were louder now. He couldn't afford to ignore her. Not when his memory was slowly unraveling the truth behind the name Marina Sanchez. He had been younger then, reckless, focused only on results, never on people. The company had been smaller, more chaotic. Interns came and went. Mistakes were swept under the rug. Promising careers were crushed like ants if they got in the way. And Marina had been one of those casualties. Except she hadn't disappeared. She had waited. He grabbed his phone and dialed internal security. I want full background checks on all janitorial staff, especially Marina Sanchez. Dig up everything. Family, education, past employment, travel. I want to know what she had for breakfast. The voice on the other end hesitated. But sir, she passed all our checks when hired. Clean record. I didn't ask what she passed. I asked for the truth. He hung up and leaned against the window, staring down at the street below, watching the city move without knowing that a storm was brewing inside his own tower. Across the building, Marina entered the small, forgotten break room used by maintenance. She sat down, slowly removed her gloves, and placed them neatly on the table. Then, from her pocket, she pulled out a small notebook. Worn leather, edges frayed. Inside, names, dates, departments, conversations, all things she'd heard, collected, documented over the last 6 months. Page after page of secrets. She flipped to one marked with a red ribbon. At the top, Eduardo Rivera, Legal Affairs. She stared at the name. The first man who had forged a signature on her dismissal papers 10 years ago. The man who had lied under oath. She had cleaned the floor outside his office every Tuesday for 4 months. And she had heard enough. It was time to pay him a visit, but not as a janitor, as a ghost of his past. The legal department sat tucked into the quieter east wing of the building, a floor often ignored by most, except when contracts were due or lawsuits loomed. It was the type of place where whispers were currency and silence was a shield. Marina stepped out of the maintenance elevator and adjusted her grip on the cart handle. Her gloves were gone now, her posture different, subtle, but anyone looking closely would notice the shift. She wasn't cleaning. She was hunting. Office 17. The plaque on the frosted glass door read, Eduardo Rivera, Head of Legal Affairs. Behind that door sat the man who, according to the notes she had gathered, had been the first to raise allegations against her a decade ago. He had signed documents with missing evidence, redirected internal memos, and above all, kept her name out of every appeal channel possible. A company man, loyal to power. Marina knocked, 3 soft taps, a pause, then his voice, yes. She opened the door gently and stepped in. Eduardo looked up, eyebrows knitted at first in confusion. He was mid-50s now, hair thinned, stomach a little larger, but still wearing that smug expression of someone who believed they were untouchable. "You're not scheduled to clean this office until Thursday," he said, looking at her uniform. "I'm not here to clean," Marina replied. His expression changed. "Do I know you?" She took another step inside, letting the door shut behind her. "You should," she said calmly. "You were one of the reasons I disappeared." There it was, the flicker in his eyes, fear wrapped in denial. I think you're mistaking me for—" "No, Eduardo, I'm not." Her voice sharpened. "I'm Marina Sanchez, the intern you helped frame 10 years ago. The one whose career you ruined without blinking." He stood up slowly, adjusting his tie. "This is very inappropriate. If you have a grievance, you should speak with—" "I've already spoken with silence," she interrupted. "For 10 years. I've listened to lies, watched men like you climb higher, step over the bodies you buried. But I'm not here to scream, or cry, or ask for justice." She stepped closer, placed her notebook gently on the desk, and opened it to a page covered in handwriting. "I'm here to remind you." He stared at the page, his name, dates, quotes, even the fake email he had written under someone else's login credentials. His face went pale. "You can't prove any of this," he muttered. She smiled, slow, precise. "You're right. Not yet. But you'll be surprised how fast truth spreads when someone finally says it out loud, especially when someone's been watching." She turned and began walking toward the door. He called out, "Wait." She paused. "I have a family," he said, now breathless. "A career. You'll destroy me." Marina didn't look back. "I had all that too," she said softly, "until men like you took it away." And then she was gone, left behind, a man trembling behind his desk, a page full of evidence, and a name that refused to stay buried. And that was only the beginning. Back in her tiny apartment, Marina sat by the window, the city's glow casting shadows across her face. The leather notebook lay open in front of her, next to a steaming cup of tea she hadn't touched. The confrontation with Eduardo hadn't shaken her. It had centered her. It felt like oxygen. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was moving. She flipped to the next page of the notebook. Luis Barcelo, Human Resources, the man responsible for pushing her name through the system like a piece of contaminated paperwork. He hadn't signed her termination, but he had delivered it. Cold, robotic, without ever looking her in the eyes. She remembered that day clearly. She had arrived early, as usual. Her desk had already been cleared out. A box waited for her at reception. No one explained why. No one said goodbye. Just a letter, already printed and sealed, and Luis's blank stare as he read from a script that began with "I'm afraid." But Marina wasn't afraid anymore. The next morning, Luis entered the elevator humming a jazz tune, adjusting his expensive cufflinks, tapping his briefcase against his leg. His reflection in the mirror showed a man content, confident, perhaps even proud, until the doors opened, and she stepped in. He froze. She offered him a small nod. He didn't return it. He turned forward, stiff, trying to pretend the moment didn't exist. The doors closed. Silence. After 2 floors, she broke it. "Still working in HR, Luis?" His jaw clenched. "You work here?" "Apparently, yes. For 6 months now." She turned to face him, eyes calm but piercing. "Strange how you didn't recognize me." I see a lot of people," he mumbled. She smiled faintly. "Yes, especially the ones you erase." He looked down. "I was following protocol. It wasn't personal." "Of course not. That's the beauty of bureaucracy, isn't it? No fingerprints." The elevator stopped. Her floor. She stepped out, then paused. "I remember when you handed me the termination letter," she said, not turning around. "You didn't even look me in the eye. You never saw me, Luis. But now you will." The doors closed behind her, and he remained frozen, his reflection now haunted. Back at her cart, Marina didn't slow down. Her movements were steady, purposeful. Every corridor she walked had been mapped, every whisper gathered, every face memorized. She had walked these halls as a ghost long enough. Now, they would see her. And when they finally did, it would already be too late. The CEO hadn't slept. He sat at his desk long after the building had gone dark, his tie discarded, top button undone, the taste of scotch still bitter in his mouth. Security footage played on his monitor, hours of it. He'd ordered surveillance to track every movement Marina made in the building. And what he saw disturbed him more than anything she'd said. She didn't move like an employee. She moved like a strategist. She lingered outside key offices. She timed her presence with specific meetings. She paused by printers, conference calls, even elevators, always near the people that mattered. Legal, HR, compliance. She was listening, learning, planning. He leaned back, running a hand through his graying hair. Who was this woman? How had she slipped through every system undetected? And more importantly, what was she going to do next? He pulled up her employee file again. Blank. Sanitized. Like someone had rewritten her entirely. Not even her school records were linked. No relatives. No known associations. It was like she'd built her identity just to enter this building. And he was starting to believe it. His phone buzzed. A message from internal security. Sir, you asked for a full background check. You're going to want to see this in person. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his coat, and headed to the private surveillance office on the lower floor. Meanwhile, on the 12th floor, Marina stood in the copy room, alone. The hum of the machines provided cover as she carefully opened the back panel of the network printer. Inside, tucked behind the cables, she placed a small flash drive. It wasn't just a drive, it was a trigger. She had copied dozens of documents during her night shifts. NDA breaches, falsified reports, altered timestamps, emails with deleted recipients. She had gathered proof, not just of her own injustice, but of a pattern that stretched far wider than her case alone. She didn't want revenge. She wanted exposure, ruin, not just for the CEO, but for all of them. Everyone who stayed silent, everyone who let her fall. But timing was everything. One move too soon, and the system would devour the evidence before it ever reached the surface. She had one shot, and it was coming. The screen on the printer blinked green. Upload complete. She closed the panel and walked out, blending once again into the beige walls, the forgotten shadows, the hollow routines. No one greeted her. No one noticed her. But tomorrow, everyone would know her name. The next morning, the office felt different. Not visibly. The lights still flickered the same way in the elevator. The coffee still tasted like burnt ambition. The same meaningless morning greetings echoed through the halls. But beneath all that normalcy, something had shifted. People walked a little faster, looked over their shoulders, whispered a little too quietly. Something was coming, and they didn't know what. But she did. Marina moved through the building like she always had, silent, efficient, unseen. But this time, she was humming softly to herself. Not a song, not even a melody, just a rhythm, a pulse, like the ticking of a clock. Tick, tock, boom. Upstairs, in the surveillance office, the CEO sat surrounded by monitors, cables, and men who looked more like private investigators than corporate security. One of them leaned forward, adjusting the feed. This is what we found, he said. It's not just her work here. She's been planning something for months. He played a series of silent clips. Marina, in different corners of the building. Marina reading discarded documents. Marina plugging in a flash drive. Marina listening, watching, waiting. She has more information than anyone outside the board should have, the guard continued. Honestly, she has more than most inside the board. The CEO clenched his jaw. This is blackmail, he growled. She's trying to take me down. No, sir, the man said slowly. She's not threatening anything. She hasn't made a single demand. That's what makes this worse. He turned toward the CEO. She's not after your money. She's after your name. That shook him. He stood abruptly, walking toward the window overlooking the lobby below. And that's when he saw her. Marina, standing in the center of the floor, mop in hand. Not working, just watching, looking up, right at him. Their eyes locked through the glass. And she smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just enough to let him know. She knew. He turned away, pulse quickening, mind racing. He had to get ahead of this. He had to shut it down before it spread. Meanwhile, on the executive floor, one of the IT interns walked into the server room, yawning, coffee in hand. He noticed the printer blinking. A strange green light he hadn't seen before. Curious, he approached it, then paused. The screen was flashing. Upload complete. 14,928 files synced. His hand trembled. He tapped a key, and what he saw was the beginning of the end. Documents, names, emails, evidence, all of it tied to decisions, payoffs, and cover-ups that reached the highest levels of the company, including the man at the top. And as the clock hit 10:00 a.m., the files began to spread, automatically, email by email, inbox by inbox, machine by machine. Marina didn't even need to press send. She had already pulled the trigger. It started as a whisper. One assistant gasped at her screen, then another, then a third. Within minutes, inboxes across the entire corporation were lighting up with the same subject line. You deserve to know the truth. Employees clicked. Screens filled with PDFs, forwarded emails, scanned documents, all containing the buried secrets of the company. Internal memos marked confidential. Signatures of top executives authorizing terminations without just cause. Records of whistleblowers silenced with legal threats. False audits. Fabricated performance reviews. And more. So much more. By 10:15 a.m., the phones were ringing nonstop. By 10:20, the first department heads were leaving their offices, visibly pale, muttering to each other in panic. By 10:30, the legal team locked themselves inside their floor. And by 10:35, the CEO's private elevator was called to the ground floor. He stormed into the boardroom, already filled with trembling faces. Who leaked this? He demanded, voice booming. No one answered, but they all knew. Marina, the janitor, the ghost. One of the board members finally spoke, voice dry. It's not just a leak. The files are organized, curated. She didn't just send dirt. She built a case. She's trying to destroy us. Another muttered, holding his head in his hands. The CEO turned toward the monitors on the wall, where the IT department had connected a live trace. Every second, more recipients appeared. Employees, investors, journalists, government agencies. He slammed his fist against the table. Shut it down. Kill the server. We tried, the IT lead said grimly. It's too late. It's already off-site. Cloud-based distribution. Peer-to-peer backups. She planned for this. Then, a knock. 3 soft taps. All heads turned. The boardroom door opened slowly. And there she stood. Marina Sanchez. Not in her janitor uniform. She wore a fitted black blouse, clean trousers, hair loose over her shoulders, eyes calm and direct. She looked nothing like the woman who used to mop these floors. She looked like she belonged here. The CEO's face twisted. You think this makes you a hero? He spat. She stepped inside. No, she said quietly. I think it makes me seen. Silence fell like a blade. You erased me, she continued. You used me, buried my name, killed my future. But I never left. She laid a folder on the table. Not full of evidence, just a single page. Her resignation. I came to this place as someone you try to destroy. I leave as someone you'll never forget. And then she looked at each of them, one by one, not with hate, but with something far more dangerous. Clarity. Then, she turned and walked out of the room. No one stopped her, because deep down they all knew. The damage was done. The empire had cracked, and it was only a matter of time before it fell. By midday, the story had already reached the news cycle. Screens in cafes, offices, taxis, all showing the same headline. Massive whistleblower leak exposes corruption inside top corporation. Social media ignited like dry forest under lightning. Hashtags exploded. Former employees shared their stories. Anonymous accounts released even more internal memos that corroborated Marina's evidence. People who had been silenced for years finally had proof, and they weren't holding back. The CEO sat alone in his office, blinds drawn, suit jacket discarded, face buried in his hands. Calls were coming in nonstop. The board was demanding a press statement. The shareholders wanted emergency meetings. Legal counsel wanted distance. The damage control team? Useless. Because there was no controlling what had already been released. And the worst part? It was too clean. Marina hadn't just exposed them. She had mapped the rot from root to tip. She hadn't published angry rants or vague accusations. She had written a narrative. Cold. Precise. Backed by evidence. Verified by timestamps. She didn't scream. She simply revealed. and it was far louder. An email notification chimed. He didn't want to check it, but he did. It was from Marina. Subject, closure. He opened it with shaking fingers. There was no message body, just an attachment. A photo. A much younger Marina, standing at her graduation ceremony in a cap and gown, smiling wide. And next to her, him, shaking her hand, smiling. He gasped. He had met her. He had known her. He had congratulated her personally when she joined the company as an intern. He had welcomed her as part of a diversity initiative, praised her languages, admired her drive. And then, years later, he had fired her without even reading her name. He had erased her like a typo. And now, she had become the sentence that would end him. He stared at the photo for a long time, as if it might change if he blinked enough. But it didn't. Across the building, executives were packing their things. Board members were calling lawyers. Government agencies were preparing audits. Investigations were being announced. The tower he built was still standing, but the foundation had cracked, and everyone could hear it groaning. Marina, meanwhile, walked out the front doors of the building for the last time. No one stopped her. No one dared. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just walked, with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. And somewhere far above, through the glass windows of the office that used to control her fate, he watched her leave, not as a janitor, not as a victim, but as the storm that rewrote everything. Weeks passed. The empire once thought unshakable was now bleeding from every corner. Investors had pulled out. Government investigators lined the halls with briefcases and subpoenas. Executives resigned in silence, some escorted by security. Others simply vanished, trying to outrun the spotlight. But none of them could outrun her, because Marina's name now lived in headlines. News anchors spoke it with reverence. Journalists described her as the invisible revolution, the woman who rose from the shadows of a janitor's uniform to dismantle a corporate fortress brick by brick, with nothing but her mind, her silence, and her truth. She declined every interview. She refused every award. She didn't need a podium. She had already said everything she needed to say, not with words, but with actions. In a small, sunlit apartment overlooking the city, Marina sat at her desk, sipping black coffee, flipping through a worn notebook, the same one that had carried her secrets, her plans, her scars. Now, most of the names have been crossed out, but not all. There were still others. Other buildings, other towers, other people who believed the weak stayed quiet forever. She gently closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer, not out of vengeance, but because she finally felt light. Outside her window, life moved on. The world didn't know the years she'd spent hiding, the nights of fear, the moments she doubted herself, the shame that didn't belong to her, but clung to her skin anyway. They only saw what she had done, and maybe that was enough. Across the city, the former CEO sat alone in his apartment, no longer in his tower, no longer powerful. His name now synonymous with disgrace. His legacy buried beneath a story written not by lawyers or speechwriters, but by a woman he had forgotten, a woman he had underestimated. He stared at the TV as a documentary played, the translator who shook the system. He turned it off before they said her name again. But it didn't matter. He would hear it for the rest of his life, because Marina Sanchez had taught him, and the world, that even the quietest voice can echo louder than 1,000 lies. And sometimes, the people we erase come back as earthquakes. And that's how this story ends. A story of pain, courage, intelligence, and above all, faith. Because sometimes, when the world ignores you, when injustice seems to have the final word, when everything feels lost, that's exactly when God begins to move in silence. He lifts up those who were humiliated. He gives strength to the forgotten. And he brings justice where men have failed. Marina didn't fight with power. She didn't fight with wealth. She fought with purpose. And maybe, just maybe, she was guided by something far greater than herself. To anyone watching this right now, even if the world doesn't see you, God does. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing more powerful stories like this. Stories that remind us that hope always finds a way, even through the darkest nights. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I'd love to know where this story has reached. I'll see you in the next video. And never forget, God's eyes never close.